Welcome to the show, everybody. Our guest, Lainie Liberti, is a best-selling author, an international speaker, a community leader, a teen mentor, and alternative education advocate who helped to spearhead the thriving world schooling movement. So, Lainie, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. I'm really, really thrilled to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And to jump right into it, my first question is if you could share literally just, yeah, your story about your life and how you became who you are today. And specifically, if you can jump into part of this, into how you got into world schooling and taking your son out of the public education system.
Yeah, I'm going to give you like little bits and pieces, but really, the 2008 economy crash in California was probably the best place to start. At the time, was a single parent. And at the time, my son was 9 years old. And I owned and ran a boutique branding advertising agency and had worked in advertising for about 18 years. And at the time, it was kind of crazy. I felt overworked and overstressed and pulled in all of these directions and really felt like, I just was so ready for a change. And when the economy crashed in 2008, um, I was faced with knowing that I wasn't bringing my staff back at the
Mm,
beginning of the following year. I knew that, I saw my clients dropping away left and right. I primarily dealt with green eco companies and nonprofits at the time, and I was a very specialized boutique agency, and I was in demand. However, the nonprofits, their funding went away, and well, that meant that my clients were going away. And one night I was sitting in the office. It was late one night with my son, and I just had this wave come over me, this wave of intuition, this wave of knowing. And I turned around and said to my son, who was, it was after school, it must have been like sometime between 9 and 10 p.m. And he was, like I said, 9 years old. And still at the office with me, and we're shutting down. And I looked at him, and his name is Miro, and I said, Miro, what would you think if we just got rid of all this stuff and just took an adventure, me and you? And I remember his face. He stopped playing the game that he was playing, and he turned around and he looked at me and he said, seriously? And I said, yeah. And he said, I'm in. And I said, let's do it. And the part that I didn't really expand on was being a single parent, overstressed, overworked, and working really hard, sometimes 12 to 16 hours a day. My
wow.
it was crazy when you own an agency, when you own something like that, you're doing everything. You're playing all these hats and, wearing all these hats and playing all these roles.
Yeah.
And my son said to me all the time, Mom, you're always working. You're never spending any time with me. And the cognitive dissonance of what he was saying was real. I knew it was true, but it didn't make sense because I was living, air quotes, the American dream, and I was doing it for
Mm,
him. And I just didn't have these things in balance. And when this wave of inspiration hit me, I knew like I'd take my next breath, that kind of knowing that this was the right thing to do. And I knew he'd say yes. And within less than 6 months, we had closed the business. I had, you know, um, given some of my clients away, worked with some of my clients to do some freelance. But basically everything was shut, closed. We sold or gave away everything, and we took off with two really heavy backpacks. And the idea was we were going to leave the United States for 1 year. And can you imagine like leaving for a year? In your mind, it feels like a big time. It feels
yeah.
like it's like, wow, a year of your life. That's like a really
Yeah.
long time. Well, that was almost 14 years ago.
Wow.
And we still haven't gone back. And we had the
Wow.
plan to travel for 1 year with our backpacks through Latin America. We were going to go we're from, like I said, LA. So head south, Mexico, all the way south through Central America, through South America, and eventually end up at the tip of South America in Ushuaia, Argentina. So that was 14 years ago. And I have a confession. We have never made it to Ushuaia yet.
Really?
Still time. Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
It's just been a crazy life transforming adventure. And I'd say that was the biggest catalyst. But of course, there's all sorts of things that happen before and after. But that gives you a nice foundation to kind of understand how transformation started within our lives.
Wow. Whew.
Where do you go from there?
Well, like I'm just taking it all in, like because I took a year abroad as well. I back in 2018 I had dropped out of university. I was going to be a teacher and a counselor, and I just realized like literally, you know what was really interesting? It was like you. It was one day, randomly in the fucking shower, it just hit me like a bolt of lightning. You're dropping out of university, like. Like I didn't tell my dad. Like I did. Like I just. It was so. It was so weird. It was like you said. It was just like this felt sense of knowing. And you know what? I don't remember if I told my mom before or after I dropped out. I don't remember. Um. I think what I did is I think I told my mom like I'm dropping out of university. And my mom and I have always been like best friends. So like she's like cool, okay. My dad was a bit different. My dad was fucking pissed. Like he was furious. Mom was like, yeah, cool. Like my mom's always believed in me. Like she's like, yeah, it's all gonna be fine. And so I remember I went to university for the first week, just like I remember like almost as a romantic goodbye. You know what I mean? Like it's almost like you're gonna break up with your girlfriend or something, and you're like let's go on one last date and let's make it beautiful, and then we'll say goodbye in a good place. You know what I mean? Where we can remember the good times. And it was kind of like that with the university. Like I went for like I think like 2 days, and it was like I was almost just saying goodbye to everything, and I don't think I. And I remember going around to all my guidance counselors because I had really good relationships with a lot of the professors and guidance counselors, and I was really excited. And I remember telling all of them, and they're like, "Wow, like that's awesome! Like good for you!" And what are you gonna do? And I had a whole dream at that point. Like I'm gonna go to New Zealand. I'm going to switch my degree, and I'm going to study under Bruce Lipton, Dr. Bruce Lipton. I was literally like, I don't know. I had this wild dream. Like I've always been a dreamer, but it was like looking back, I'm like, how did you think that was going to happen? Like I was just going to walk into his office, and be like, Bruce, you're gonna mentor me. Like that was literally this idea I had in my head. Like I was gonna walk in and I was going to blow him away with my maturity at like fucking 21 years old or something, and he was gonna be like, wow, I need to mentor this kid. I never met Dr. Bruce Lipton yet, so I never did it, but I was like, yeah, it was just like this dream. And so I drop out of university, and then I just literally, I'm like unemployed and living with my mom for like a year, I think. I think I was living for a year. And I was just like finding like who I was in a big way. I was,
You go to university right after high school?
yeah.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I
No,
mean, I have this whole conversation about education and the education system, but please continue your story and I
Yeah.
will pull it
No,
up.
you're right. And we're going to jump in there because I'd love your feedback on that after. But like, I took a year and I just like, I wanted to figure out who I was for the exact same reason you just mentioned. That I felt like the momentum of life was like, I didn't really choose what I wanted to do. Like, I remember the conversation when I wanted to be a high school teacher. I was 16 years old. My cousin was there, and I was at dinner with my mom and I think my dad and my cousin. And they asked me, like, what do you want to do with your life? And I was like, I don't know. I was 16. And I remember my cousin saying, or my mom and my cousin, I think they kind of like agreed. They're like, you'd be a good teacher. And I was like, okay, I'll be a teacher. And then my cousin was like, oh, I really liked my geography teacher. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna be a geography. Like, he was just like, I look back, I'm like looking at who I am now and how I make decisions and how, in some sense, I don't know all of who I am, but like I have a strong sense of like my process. I'm like, how did I just do that? And at the same time, it was perfect. Like I can feel the divine inspiration that essentially, like, it was almost like, in some sense, I feel like it was like God speaking through them to me. And it was like me, like, I accepted it willingly. It wasn't like, I sometimes flippantly tell the story like I had no agency and no choice, but it felt right. Like, at the time, like, it was like, okay, this is my path. I'm going to be a teacher. And like, I loved kids. Like, I was a swimming instructor for children. My favorite job ever was a camp counselor. Like, that was my favorite job in the universe. Literally 2 months overnight. I was staying there for 2 months, just mentorship, leadership, and just taking care of kids and just, making sure they're happy. And we'd end up, knowing me, like, I'd be having these deep philosophical conversations with like 13-year-olds, like, about the meaning of life and stuff. And it was just like, I loved it. And so yeah, so I'm back to kind of where I was. So I'm taking a year off. I'm living with my mom and I'm just like figuring out, like, who am I? So I was listening to a lot of podcasts. I was listening to a lot of like Joe Rogan and these different, just like a lot of psychologists. He'd have psychologists on and spiritual people. And I was just like, every day I'd probably be listening to podcasts for probably like 5 hours. It was wild. It was just continuous. And then I got like suicidally depressed at this point because I had this big dream of, like, I knew I kind of wanted to do something to do with public speaking and mentorship. And I just didn't know exactly what. And I started losing faith in my ability to get to where I wanted to go. It was like I kind of lost faith, and it was black, and I was going through a lot of issues with my brother. I was going through a lot of self-confidence challenges. I was going through issues with my mom, my dad, like everybody in my family. Like, I felt like I was a piece of shit, and I was being told essentially I was kind of like a piece of shit. Not by my mom, but everybody else was just like, you like, get your shit together kind of thing, right? And it was tough, and I had this like felt sense inside me, like, no, I need to take this time to figure out who I am. I need to, like, I was reading, like, I know you mentioned in your book, Tim Ferriss' 4-Hour Work Week. So I read the 4-Hour Work Week, and I was reading all of these like self-development, self-help books, and I was like, I was practicing, just going on, like, I was like planning like my days. Like, I was really kind of like, okay, like, at this time, at 5:30, I'll play a little video games. And then at 6:30, I'll watch a little TV, then I'll read, and then I'll go to bed. And like, I would literally, even though I was unemployed doing nothing, I was still scheduling all of my days. I'd be like, I'm going to listen to this podcast with this psychologist at like 12 p.m. And like, it was like, if anyone looked at it, it was like, it was just, this guy's on holiday, but he's like choosing how he's going to live his holiday. But for me, it was really important. And it's still really important now, because everything I learned about how to design a day and what it feels like to be relaxed and stressed and ebbing and flowing between different stages, I carry that with me today. And I think the only reason that right now I have a sense of, like, I plan everything. Like, if you looked at my day schedule, it's like I have meetings, all day up until this time, then I do my podcast, then I do this and I do that. And like, everything is scheduled, and everything is scheduled from the perspective of like a yin yang balance and ebb and a flow of how I want my days to feel like, how I want my life to feel like, how I want my weeks to be. And everything is very intentional. And everything I've built into my life today came from that year of I didn't work, meaning I didn't have anybody else telling me the value of my day, the value of my time, how I was supposed to live my life. And in that vacant vacuum of nothingness, I could choose how I wanted to live my life. And at the same time, it's like in my perception, I see it almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where it's like, when all you're doing is surviving, the mental health challenges aren't really there. Like if you are just trying to survive the wilderness, you don't have the time to worry about existential issues. You are trying not to get eaten by bears and all of these things. And so with the pure chaos of a year of nothing, I had a lot of suicidal mental health challenges of like, who are you? What are you doing with your life? What do you want to be? And in that time, it was like, oh, okay, actually, again, I didn't have the momentum of a job to tell me what my self-worth was. So it was like, okay, what do I want to do? And then that's when I realized I wanted to be a public speaker, I want to be a professor, and I want to be a podcaster. I kind of modeled that in some sense after the professor Jordan Peterson. And at that time, I was very into him. And I was kind of like modeling, look, I'd like to do everything he does in my own way. And then this is all where I tie this into what you were talking about. And so it is Christmas of 2018, I think. I'm suicidally depressed. I'm at Christmas dinner. And we have our whole family there, and my dad's friends are there. And everyone's in the other room. And I'm talking to my mom's friend, Irena. And she's a teacher. She's an elementary school teacher. And she asks me how I'm doing. And I just start crying. Like I fall apart. And I told her, I'm lost. I'm suicidal. I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I feel like I'm a fuck up. I have this massive expectation of what I want to do in my life, but I have no fucking clue how to get there. Zero clue. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. And she's like, she just kind of smiled. She looked at me and she's like, have you ever thought about being a counselor? I was like, no. Like, I remember my professor in my 4th year of university, literally, I was in teaching, and she asked me the same thing. She's like, Anton, why are you in teaching? I was like, because I love children. I really want to mentor people and be a leader. I want to help people get through the times of their life that I needed a mentor through. Like when I was in grade 9, in that transition, I want to be a grade 9 teacher to help all of those kids. And she's like, Anton, it sounds like you're more like a counselor than a teacher. I was like, no. Like, I'm going to be a teacher. Like, I've already made up my mind. And sure enough, so when Irena tells me this, it kind of goes through my head. I'm like, oh, counselor. And I really thought about it for the first time. And that's when everything kind of came together. And I was like the Jordan Peterson thing. I'm like, oh, I'll be a professor, a counselor, a public speaker, and a podcaster. Like, I'll be these like 4 things. And she's like, man, and also like, have you thought about like traveling the world or anything? And it just, everything hit. And like I had this renewed sense of passion and inspiration. I was like, yeah, I'm going to travel to New Zealand. I'm going to find Dr. Bruce Lipton. I'm going to convince him to be my professor. He's going to teach me epigenetics and all of this stuff. And that's my ticket. That's how I'm going to live my life. And then sure enough, I backpack, plan my year in New Zealand. It ended up being 3 months, and then I traveled to British Columbia for another month, and it was kind of like on and off, kind of traveling a little bit. But it was like really like 6 months of kind of really in that travel mode, and I went to New Zealand, and like it was the most magical time of my life, just going from hostel to I went literally both islands. I traveled everywhere. I drove all the way up and down both coasts, up and down, and I went to like every city. I went to every hostel, and I just, it really hit me that like none of these people care who I am. They don't care where I come from. They don't care how much money I make. They don't care about anything. It was just like I'd go to a hostel and I'd find people I resonated with, and I'd find people to have spiritual conversations with, psychological conversations, and I'd find Reiki healers and meditation teachers and people in psychology. And it was just so beautiful to just be. And I started learning how to play guitar. And I would literally do this. So I would learn how to play a song on guitar that day, and I would teach people in the hostel how to play that song that night. Like, it would literally, I'd just be like learning something and I'd teach people. And it was just such a beautiful thing. And so, like, this all kind of came to me when you were sharing, because I was just, when you were talking about this adventure and going with Myro and, just traveling South America, and just how it never ends. Like, I could feel what you were talking about, It's just, it's beautiful,
Yeah. And raising a child for this to be their life. What you said about your discovery of self within the 3 months that you experienced in New Zealand, the presence, the stepping outside of your comfort zone, the trusting your intuition, the learning, and how do you really learn something? You learn it by teaching somebody else. So you uncovered that key. All of it is possible, I thought, or I think, through travel. And in fact, for me, travel was that one gift that taught me how to be present in my life and accountable and emotionally available and emotional intelligence as well. All of those things were a big part of our transformation as a parent child. Yeah, our relationship blossomed. We started learning everything, absolutely everything. Our interests and curiosity became the catalyst for a wide open world of adventure and learning, and just it never stopped. And we were having so much fun doing it. And every country we went to, there was like this new birth of curiosity that guided us through everything. It was incredible, we became so excited about that. We helped to birth a movement of families that picked up on that excitement and wanted that kind of life for themselves, that stepped out of that sort of hamster wheel mentality of, in our case, the American dream. But Western world, everybody has that same sort of, work hard, play hard when you retire.
Yeah.
Thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Then you can live your life when you retire. And so I'm curious with you and Myro. So how, because I had one question that kind of popped through my head when you were talking. I'm curious how Myro's stages of emotional development and social development would have played out with learning in the world. So if you could please go over how you designed this idea of world schooling and unschooling, and how that impacted Myro's social, in a big way, I feel like his social development.
Yeah, I will. So I've got stories. So, like I said, we left when he was 9, just turning 10. And the first couple of years, it was, very much about the adventure of things. But to back up, I've always been an attachment parent. I read so many books about parenting and about healing and the psychology of healing and self-directed healing and that sort of thing. As somebody who grew up with a lot of trauma in my childhood and an insecure attachment style, I knew there were many things that I needed to heal before I became a parent. And I intentionally wanted to be a parent, and it was very important to me. And so those words, "you never spend any time with me, you're always working," was the biggest heartbreak, because there was nothing I wanted more in the world than to be a parent. Like, that was such a huge part of my desire for my life experience and that of my child. And a couple of things that we decided before we left on our travels. The first thing was we were going to do everything in partnership. I didn't want to be the boss. I'm actually an anarchist and don't believe in authority and obeying authority for the sake of authority. I believe that there are values that we can align ourselves with and choose, voluntarily to do what felt in alignment with our values and so forth. It doesn't mean that we're running around, in chaos or entropy. It meant that, there was no other authority outside of ourselves. And that was one thing that was really important for me to talk to my son about and really ingrain in him as a human being. And so partnership means consensual conversations, consensual interactions. It means that we are both sovereign individuals. And it also means that consent in all of our relationships was absolutely a must. So partnership really encapsulates all of that. And so our partnership meant we were deciding where we were going together, how long we were staying, what we were going to do, how we were spending our budget. He had, even at 8 years old, he had all the codes to the ATM and the bank. It was our money. And that's what partnership is, right? We talked about everything. It also meant that we were accountable for our own emotions. And if something came up, we would always every evening do a check-in. So we set lots of systems in place, and I call it scaffolding. I'm one of those people that needs to understand the scaffolding around me in order to know where my security is and how I fit into the world, and also how to break the scaffolding when I intentionally choose to, because that's my choice, my sovereign birthright as an individual to be able to make my own personal choices. But in partnership, we had to have these conversations. What worked, what didn't work, what came up for us, how we were feeling and processing certain things. And that was one of those scaffolding or foundations that we agreed upon before we left. The other thing was I wanted, and we agreed to, and this was important to me. I really wanted to say yes to everything, because came from a culture of me having restrictions because I had responsibilities and accountabilities and work and all these other stuff. And I said no to my son more than I really wanted to. And I really wanted to flip that script. And I wanted for us to say yes. And coming from the world of branding, I understood what core values were. And so my son and I defined what our core values were before we left. And instead of following rules, we had this scaffolding or tool to say, okay, is this in alignment with our core values? Then we can say yes. If it's not in alignment, we'll say no. And that became our process and our roadmap for intentionally moving through the planet. And it felt really, really great. But it did require a lot of conversation, and we were both accountable for that. And the last thing was I knew I knew intuitively, I knew that 1 year of travel, which is what we intended to do, absolutely would have been, or, potentially was more educational than fifth grade for my son. And I pulled him out of school to take this trip. And I was like, we're not doing fifth grade. We're going to go have this experience. So school's out. Let's make this a trip of wide-eyed wonderment and curiosity guiding us. And let's just go have an adventure. And so we did. So that was kind of our foundation before we left. And a couple of things happened. The first thing in the first year was not only was my son learning, because we both had freedom or liberty to learn whatever we wanted and whatever was in front of us. And our curiosity really guided us. Like, what is that? I don't know. Let's go back to our place and look it up. And how did that get there? And why is there a pattern of doorknobs that look like this in Antigua, Guatemala? Like, why? Those whys really drove the things that we learned, and it was crazy and wonderful and beautiful. And So not only did I discover he was learning naturally, but I was learning naturally. And I really embraced the fact that I had become a lifelong learner once again. And we were doing this in partnership, and it was fun, and the learning was deep. And it was sticking with us. I could tell you so many things that we learned, 12 years ago that I still remember, but I couldn't tell you what I learned in, grade school because just this passive experience that was demanded upon me. It was an extrinsic motivation to learn a thing in order to pass. We were learning because we were fulfilled. So we were learning. That was one of the first things that we discovered. And then something happened 8 months into our travels, and I told you one of our things that we agreed upon, and we practiced this almost every day, was to say yes to everything.
Yeah.
And 8 months into our travels, we were in Antigua, Guatemala, and my son looked at me and he said, "Mom, can we just do this forever?" And guess what? I had to say yes.
Wait. So you literally, like, I thought you meant that figuratively.
No.
Wait, so you literally, your rule was literally yes to everything.
As long as it was in alignment with our
With your
core
values.
Yeah.
Whoa, that's radical.
It was a radical.
Oh man, that's like overwhelming almost to me when I'm feeling into it. Like how much that would open up your life and like just force you to be just like alive. Like how much of what we do is to be safe, secure, and comfortable.
I mean, that has a space, but safety and security comes within relationships. It doesn't come from space, right? And we had the safety and security within the relationship. I want to talk about comfort. Comfort to me is one of the best teachers. And, you mentioned that I wrote a book. It's funny. I just happened to have it open. This is my book. Seen, heard, and understood parenting and partnering with teens. And I'm going to answer the rest of your question in a minute.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I didn't actually get to the part where we started world schooling, but I'll get to that in a minute. But I want to talk about comfort. So we defined these 3 areas of comfort. There's the comfort zone. Outside of the comfort zone is the stretch zone. And outside of the stretch zone is the panic zone. Within the stretch zone, that is the space where we're uncomfortable. But that's the place where we're expanding, growing, and learning. And that's the place that magic happens. The panic zone is the space where your amygdala gets activated, you go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, and you're talking about a survival mechanism. That particular function of the brain and of the human experience is meant to keep you safe. It's an experience that happens biologically, and it's designed to keep you safe. It's also the oldest part of the brain, and the human species has survived because of this mechanism. A lot of times people get stuck in the panic zone and don't have the tools to understand what's happening. That was never our thing. But going back to but recognizing what it looks like when you're there, and the security of knowing that you're there, you're doing what you need to do for survival or safety, and then you go back. You don't stay there. And that helps us to understand that, okay, we make decisions in that space for survival. But the thing that Western culture doesn't really have is a relationship with the stretch zone. And in fact, pharmaceutical companies and and advertising, which is the world I came from, by the way. Remember, advertising is about invoking a psychological response in your viewer or audience to think that there is a lack of something in order to get them back to the space of comfort. And anytime that you experience life outside of the comfort zone, in the stretch zone, right? The American public or Western culture wants to medicate you, or wants you to zone out, or those sorts of things. Do whatever you need to do to be comfortable. But travel takes you outside of your comfort zone, and understanding that our relationship to being uncomfortable transformed through travel, and thus transformed who we became. Like, I remember our first year in Cusco, and I remember my first shower. Cusco, first of all, we're living in high altitude, Cusco, Peru, and it's freaking cold. It is so fucking cold, but then it's also hot. It's hot, then cold. Yeah. And I remember stepping out of the shower, and our house, which was a nice house, had a tin roof. It was drafty. There's no insulation. Like, the houses are cold. And I remember jumping out of the shower, running to my bed, diving under the covers, pulling the covers over my head, and sobbing. I was so cold. And that kind of, and the questions of, what am I doing? Why did I do this? Why am I here? And then sort of the relaxing into, I'm cold. Why am I spark? Why are these questions being sparked inside of me? What is the thing that I need to look at and face and recognize? And why is cold a bad thing? Why? I was like fighting with myself that there was no heater, that the floors were cold, that, why do I need those things? I've got warm clothes, just put them back on, put sweats on and a sweater and a jacket and thick socks, and okay. But it was beyond the things that I understood as comfort. And I slowly started to adjust, and we ended up using, living in Cusco for 3 years as our base. I got over that. And I understood that, it's just an analogy for, okay, being cold, there's things you can do, but what is the beauty in the cold? Like, I remember Miro and I sitting on the couch, bundled up with these socks and blankets and long jackets and all this stuff over us. And we were doing like smoke rings with our breath because it was cold in the house, and just giggling and laughing and drinking tea, and just what a fun time we had. We transformed the experience into this beautiful memory that could have only happened outside of our comfort zone. And the thing that we noticed about really creating a relationship with our stretch zone or outside the comfort zone experience is our comfort zone expanded, and it now included all of these other things. And that became this wonderful transformational experience for us. And I'm just going to answer your original question real fast. And the reason why I had to give you all that background is I told you 8 months into our travels, Miro said to me, Mom, can we do this forever? And of course I said yes. And as somebody who researches, I'm a reader, I'm a researcher, I listen to podcasts, like, for me, finding the topic of something that I'm interested in, I dive into it. And you probably noticed that in my book too. It's written pretty much PhD level, but I don't have a degree in psychology. I have a degree in art, just naturally, like that didn't prepare me for this, but the study that I did prepared me for this. And so I started to research what it looked like to educate my child outside of the system. And that brought up question after question after question. philosophical question, fundamental questions like, what is education? What is the purpose of education? Why do I want my child to be educated? What does that look like? What do I want for my child? Then I included him in the conversation. And most parents don't do that with their children. Like, you know, what should the purpose of education be? And we came up with some pretty great answers, and that is to really cultivate a love of learning, which meant you can research and learn whatever you want. And we were already doing that. It meant that we both were practicing and exercising our ability to integrate experiences into learning and to recognize that learning happens in multi-age groups. So, like, my son didn't need to be in a school with other 10-year-olds. He learned from 50-year-olds as well as 4-year-olds. Like, the age didn't matter. Everybody had something to offer. So social learning became a massive part of our experience. And I'm answering your question finally. And with the development of different stages in our lives, we need different things. And so I discovered that there was something called unschooling. It already existed, and we were already doing it, and we were doing it in partnership, and it was working, and we were learning, and we were achieving all of our educational goals. I didn't give a shit what curriculum he was following, because he wasn't following any curriculum. He was following his interests. And I didn't care that, you know, he was outside of a system which you scope and sequence and testing and evaluation. That proves nothing. It proves that you can take a test and that you learn something that's insignificant or not important to the experience of that individual, because I had gone through that system. And I saw my son explode in his curiosity and his research and his self-empowerment. And so unschooling was the thing that we started to do. The only thing was, I didn't like the word unschooling because it means you're not doing something. And that's the word that people were using. And so since we were traveling, we called it world schooling. And that was the birth of world schooling. And we wanted everybody to be a part of it. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question. It took me a while to get there, but I eventually got there.
That was way better than any answer I was looking for. Hey, like I as I think I told you this before, like my dream with this podcast is down the road when I can do things more in person. I want to go on like 3-4 hour benders, I call them, just like have these conversations that like just spark and go in wild directions. Cause wow, everything you talked about was wow. Like a mentor of mine, or someone he doesn't know me, but he will be a mentor one day. But I follow his podcast, Paul Check. He often talks about these things, like he'll read a passage of Rumi or a philosopher, Carl Jung, and he'll like read a lot. He's amazing. I love Carl Jung. And like one thing Paul will say is he's like, you know, I'll just read a passage, put the book down and meditate on it for like an hour, and like really like every word, like what, like almost not read it, but like take it into my being through osmosis. Like it's almost like you were actually taking a piece of Carl Jung into yourself. And it's like, and so I was listening to all of what you were said, because there was a time like you were speaking and I was like, because the great thing about your computer is when you speak and you look at me, I don't know if you're doing this on purpose, but it looks like you're looking directly into my eyes. I don't know if you're actually
looking at you.
Okay, so you're looking at me, and somehow it also looks like so when you're speaking, are you looking into my eyes or are you looking into the camera?
I'm looking into your eyes.
Because it's amazing is that it literally, like when you're speaking to me, looking in my eyes, when I'm
Yeah.
looking at you, it looks like you're directly looking into my eyes. And it put me in a trance. Like you were talking, and it was really, I kind of felt a bit psychedelic because I could feel this ebb and this flow where you're speaking. And because I'm looking, I think there's some sort of mechanism when human beings look into each other's eyes for a while. There's this, it's like time and space kind of folds in on itself, and it disappears. And it's like, in some sense, you lose your ability to focus on the specific words of what someone is saying, but I feel like you take in something deeper. Like it's almost like when I'm looking in your eyes, when we're connected in that way, it's this wild thing where it's like you're almost down, like you're sending a direct download into my consciousness rather than using a word that I decode and then put that in my consciousness. It's almost like you think you're not as efficient at taking in information, but possibly it's actually more efficient because you're sending a direct zip code or like a zip file right into their consciousness. Because it was wild. Like I was in a very deep way. Like I was like feeling everything you were talking about, and it was giving me kind of these visceral emotions, like Peru and the cold, and like it was like you're like, first of all, you're a great storyteller, and it's like the way you'll describe feelings and emotions and things, and again, just that's the elegance of a good storyteller, is that you can portray the five senses into a story. Again, like a not a good storyteller can't portray the five senses. They can only maybe portray what happened, but they can't portray the feeling, the smell, the word, like everything, right? And so like you're talking about all this stuff, and I'm just like, it's a lot to process. You know what I mean? Like again, back to the Paul Check thing, like you just talked beautifully for like probably 10 or 15 minutes there or something. And it just like, I just felt like just this download. And it's like, as a podcaster, it's an interesting position to be in, because when someone else listening to this podcast can pause it and just ponder what you've just said. My role is to like take it in and immediately like kind of adjust and assimilate and then put it in a new direction. And it's just this wild thing where like I'm like taking in everything, and I'm thinking about like my children and one day and myself. And even when you were talking about, like, I love this thing you said about every night doing a check-in.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, that's not even with parenting. That's like that's life. Like, why don't you take a check-in with your spouse, your partner, yourself? Like, ask, like, how am I doing tonight? You know what I mean? Like, so much of the time, as I alluded to, like, we're just being shipped from one event to the next. It's like, I finish work, and then I go to the gym, and then when I'm after the gym, I come home and I make food, and then I watch an episode of TV. Then it's like a lot of life is just this constant, just one event after another, and you never really get to, unless you choose to, you never get to slow down and reflect on your experiences.
That's why I advise giving up conventional life. Seriously. Yeah. Because conventional life keeps us occupied and it keeps us not present. We got stuff to do, and we get caught up in that. I couldn't find a way to be present in my own life, in conventional life. But imagine being with another human being 24/7 for like 15 years. Like, we traveled together. We were together every single day. We had to have these scaffolding, again, as I call it, and we had to have this in place in order to make our relationship, our connection work. And the two questions that we used, I mean, there were a lot of things that we, brought in and brought out of we called it a nightly check-in. And then later, when we developed our teen retreats, which my son and I founded a company together called Project World School, we brought this process into our teen retreats. But the two questions that we used is, what worked today? That's a non-judgment question, right? What worked today? It's an objective way of expressing this worked. What didn't work today? And that, to me, those two questions require couple of things. Self-inquiry, to check in, because the foundation of the judgment of working or not working comes from within. But again, it's a very non-judgmental question, saying you didn't, not saying you did this. Like, that's not how we phrase it at all. It's like, well, it didn't work when you ignored me. It didn't work when I don't know, whatever the thing happened. It's instead of pointing fingers, it's the act of self-inquiry, the act of accountability, the act of emotional intelligence, the act of connection, the act of communication. All of those things are wrapped into those two simple questions. And you had said to me before we started talking or recording, my son, Miro, you said he's a great writer. Well, he's a great communicator because all of his life we've practiced communicating.
That's what I felt about him when I read his passage in your book, is like a very deep level of self-reflection. He's very insightful. And I like what he said. He's like, I love my mom and she's not perfect. And it's like, neither of us are. Like, I like that. Like, that's an interesting thing. And then I like what either he or you said about so much of the time we view our parents as gods.
Yeah.
But yeah, you had a relationship. And this is another question I have is, you've mentioned in this story that you'd go through phases of having a home base and then, I'm extrapolating here, but like kind of then maybe venturing into the wilderness. And that could be a city, that could be a town. Like, it's just something that's not your home base. And so how do you perceive, even currently, like I know you and your son live in the same town in Mexico right now, and that's what you're calling home base. So how do you perceive how the rhythms of your life are similar or different when you're in your home base as to when you are in a period of exploration in the wilderness, you could call it?
It's a balance. It really is. I mean, we went for many years without a home base. We'd go and stay a month here, go somewhere else and stay. But then there were times that we just desired a home base, and there was nothing we had to do. There was no place we had to be. The only times that we were driven by regulations were visa regulations. We had to leave and come back. And travelers know about visa runs and things like that. But that was the only thing guiding us, or not guiding us, but creating some sort of tension against what we had to do. And we like living free and in freedom. My last name is Liberty. Like, how could that not be free? Like, that to me is sort of fundamental to who we are. So, yeah, there were different seasons for different things. I mean, I loved when we were nomadic. I loved when we had a base. I loved when we gave up our base. I loved when we became nomadic again. And we just worked on a cycle of whatever worked. And there was one time we decided that we were done with Cusco after 3 years. We would use it as our base. We'd go off and travel and come back, but really fell deeply in love with the culture, the history, the archaeology, the community that we started to cultivate there. We loved it. But then there was a time where, I started saying, okay, we've been living in the mountains for 3 years as our base. Let's go to the beach. I want to go to the beach here. He was like, all right, let's go do it. So we moved to Ecuador.
Wow.
So that kind of freedom is, everybody should live with that kind of freedom.
That's beautiful. And I'm curious, like this is a much more philosophical question, but I'm kind of extrapolating, like, human nature and us as a species. Like, it's interesting to think, like, what a world would look like if everybody was doing what you and Myro did. Because, like, in some sense, Like, is one reason the world is structured the way it is because we've been conned into thinking that we all need a home base for the rest of our lives in one place? Because in some sense, is that how cities get formed and how cities get so powerful and all encompassing? Is that people are like, this is where I'm going to be for the rest of my life, and it's almost like where, like, it's almost extrapolating, like, what would a world structure look like? What would civilizations look like? What would the world look like if the world was more nomadic, where human nature was more in tune with that nomadic side, where there is phases of life, like intuitions, where it's like, for this phase, where people kind of felt like, I might not be doing this forever. This might only be 3 years, 5 years, 1 year. Have you ever thought about like how the way we live our lives influences the structures and the power structures and social structures that get formed?
A lot. Yeah. Miro and I talk about philosophy and anthropology a lot because we're noticing things as not only an outsider, but as somebody who is really eager to learn and to immerse ourselves and really expand our awareness of the world and how we fit into it. Culture, there's parts of culture that is artificially manufactured, and those are the parts that I see as the dungeons that we create for ourselves. And they're really dungeons of ideas. And if we don't practice challenging those ideas, some people can call them worldviews, some people can call them, cultural norms. If we don't practice challenging those and pushing the boundaries of those things, we're destined to just continue patterns and function within a system. Who do systems benefit? Well, those in power. And as somebody who's an anarchist who rejects power just because they have power, I mean, it doesn't mean I agree or disagree. It means that I get to choose whether or not I agree and disagree. I'm not advocating breaking laws. Unless you want to, but I'm not using anarchy as a way of being a criminal. Like, to me, that's not the function. The function is to honor the authority within myself and understand the consequences of making choices for self within a system. And if the system is not in alignment with my values, live outside of that system. And if you can manage to do that in a way that doesn't hurt another human being, that really helps like elevate your own sense of adventure and self and your life purpose and so forth, do it. Absolutely do it. But if you feel like, and most people I talk to, most families that I talk to that are interested in world schooling, are not in alignment with the system of, they call it the hamster wheel. You keep running, you work to pay the bills, you pay the bills, and, you work more. And, that whole system is not really living. And so part of it comes to questioning, what do you value? What are the core values that you hold dear? How important are relationships and connections to you? As somebody who went from making, pretty upper six figures when I owned my business and worked in advertising to living off of $1,000 a month for two people. Wow. Like
Yeah, wow.
We did that intentionally. We did that because we no longer valued the cycle of consumerism and that was something we wanted to shed, and we wanted to be closer to the connection of self and humanity. And that's what we did. And that's what we're still doing. Money's so not important to me other than having enough to live the life that I want to live, which is clearly not the same kind of life that I lived in LA with my Mercedes and my 2,000 square foot loft. I mean, and all my goodies. I don't have that, and I went for many, many, many years of only owning what I could carry. And that really transforms your relationship to stuff, your relationship to consuming, your relationship to experiences. And it was comfortable. It was comfortable because our comfort zone expanded to include that. And we adjusted and transformed to have that experience.
Wow. How so like cuz you gave up your advertising business when you left. How did you make money for those, 13 years nomadically? Like how did you make money?
Easy. The first year we lived off of savings.
Yeah.
That was, and that helped us have the the cushion to sort of transform ourselves and not stress over money. But the second year, I was like, okay, I need to work. I could do a little bit of consultation with advertising. I could do some writing. But I really was burnt out. And even though I was talented doing that, I didn't want to give that to the world. So I started blogging, and I discovered, in the early, part of our travels, 2009, 2010, we could earn about $1,000 in advertising a month. That was sufficient for us living in Nicaragua or Guatemala or El Salvador, wherever we were living. We could live off of that. I only needed to work, and very little. And I got to live very big. So, we cooked at home and we took local buses, and we described our experiences as living as visiting locals. We weren't a tourist. We were living in local towns and we weren't living in Western hotels. We were living in the local housing, and we immersed ourselves. We learned and immersed ourselves, and that's how we earned a living. And then in 2012, was it 2012 or? Yeah, it was 2012. My son was moving into his adolescence and started to desire more social interaction. And at the time, we were based in Peru. We had gone as far south down as Bolivia and Peru. And we're like, we love Cusco. Let's stay here for a bit. I love it, love it, love it. It was so exciting to us. We love the Andean culture, the mysticism, the archaeology, the history. We were learning so much. We were going to like Machu Picchu and Sacsayhuaman and all of these wonderful like archaeological sites. And like your Bruce Lipton, desire. Well, I started like meeting and reaching out to these researchers. So I met people like Brian Forrester, and he was on Ancient Aliens and doing a ton of work around some of the theories in Peru. And we became his assistant because I asked him.
Really? Wow, that's cool.
So it was just a matter of like, who cares if the world says no? I'm going to ask, because the worst that can happen is no. And so we ended up working with him with the elongated skulls. And I suggested that we photograph all of these elongated skulls he was working with. And so I took my green fuzzy travel towel and pinned it as a backdrop, and I made like a lazy Susan from materials I bought at one of the hardware stores. And I brought my camera and we put it on a tripod and we photographed these elongated, 15 of them.
Are you talking about the Anna Mitchell Hedges crystal skulls, like in Indiana Jones?
Not those, but the elongated skulls, the ones that.
Oh, like they're not crystal, they're literal real skulls.
Yeah, so we got to pick them up, put them on a tripod. So my son and I were.
Sorry, one second. Wait, how big did you say they were?
So the elongation was.
Whoa, those are huge.
I have pictures. All the pictures that we took.
Oh man!
So
sorry, keep going. Wow.
Yeah, so this was in Paracas, Peru, and so we did this thing for him. So we photographed all of them. We got to take them out of the case of the museum and put them on the tripod. And then we delivered these high-res photos for him. But we got to learn about how to identify the trepidation, the ancient holes in the skulls.
Oh, yeah.
And we got to learn how to identify those that were deformed through the boards. And we got to see the difference between those that were born that way. And then we got to see the hybrids. And then we got deeper into some of these theories. And we had these skulls in our hand. We got to see the baby skulls with the eyes that came up like this.
Whoa.
We got to learn the different nerve endings and how they were different in the hybrids versus the human deformed skulls. We got to see all of it just because we were interested, and we got to study with this particular researcher. And we met many researchers because we were just there, and we asked, can we tag along? Or could you share with us your stuff? We met one of the father and son. He was probably in his 80s, and the son was in his mid 50s, maybe early 60s. And they were Peruvian researchers that talked about the land of the giants, that wrote books about the aliens and all this crazy stuff. And we also studied the academic archaeology and saw where things sort
diverged.
Of changed. And that gave us a really rich understanding of the builders of Machu Picchu and the ancient builders and all the different ages. We also learned that Peru was one of the only countries that had an official department of UFOs.
Really?
Department, yeah. And then we learned to start asking questions to locals. What were their family traditions about UFOs? We heard stories of UFOs going in and out of one of the big lakes in the Sacred Valley in this town called Chinchero. And the stories of just families telling, legends. And that got me really interested in like origin stories around the world. I am really fascinated with myth. And he became an avid scholar. His knowledge is that of a PhD in this area, an avid scholar of Greek myth, Roman myth, and some of the other myths around the world. So we did comparative myth, religion, and all of this stuff, just because nobody ever said this is beyond your scope of understanding. Nobody ever said that to him. Nobody said that you're too young to go there. I remember several years ago, we were in Greece, we were in Athens, and we were talking to the docent about all the sculptures. And I'm jumping around countries. I mean, we've been around the world. Yeah. But I remember talking to the docent, and she was blown away that this young teen knew more, or at least as much as she did. And she had a PhD and a doctorate, one or the other, in history, in ancient history. And he was... There was nothing he didn't know in this conversation. And it was just really fascinating. And I was so proud.
Wow. Two questions that jump up to me. One is, was your primary method of transportation always like busing and that kind of
Yeah,
thing?
until we decided that we needed to go somewhere else.
And
So
then it was a car?
no, then it was an airplane.
Oh,
Like we
that's what I mean. So it was like you were more into either obviously an airplane, like, but when you were in a continent, you would pretty much always use the local transportation, busing. So you would never really like have your own car or anything.
No, we didn't need
Interesting.
to own a car. Actually, as somebody who came from LA, I actually hated driving after
Wow.
years of rush hour, but we didn't need it. It was an expense that we didn't need. And it was much more freeing not having a car and just going to
Wow.
a place and saying, okay, we're now in this small beach town on the coast of who knows where, Nicaragua, or you know what, let's go to the mountains, let's research, let's see what's around, where do we want to go. And that always gave us the freedom to make big decisions or little decisions, and we did it together. We unpacked the information we had, we looked at our budget, we looked at how much money we had, we looked at what we desired, what the experience we desired to have, and we just did it. But there were times that we jumped from, Latin America to Europe or to Africa or to Asia. Like we did that too.
Yeah.
But every time we go to Asia or somewhere else in the world, we couldn't wait to get back to Latin America. It just really feels like home for us. And it
Wow.
always did.
So
Go
for you,
ahead.
did you guys ever have a home base in Europe or Africa, or was it always the home base was always in Latin America?
Always in Latin America. We
Interesting.
we stayed in uh, we stayed in Greece for about 5 months, but in different parts. We were in South Africa. It's the only. I wish I could say we had more travel experiences in Africa. We only went to one country, and I still haven't been to Egypt.
I was just gonna say that. I was like, have you been to Egypt?
Yeah,
Wow.
but there's still time.
Yeah, totally. Wow. When I have Robert Edward Grant on the podcast, I'm going to introduce you guys. Do you know him, Robert Edward Grant?
No, no.
Oh, he's like my newest obsession. He makes me emotional. I don't know why. Like sometimes I'll hear him speak, I'll just start crying. Like it's he gives me a visceral emotional reaction whenever he talks. I get this feeling like I don't know if it's past lives or not, but like I almost got this like father, like I don't usually, people don't ever register really as father figures for me. Almost nobody, but for whatever reason, I don't know if it's a connection he and I have, and it'll be interesting to see when I do meet him one day, what ends up happening, if we end up having a friendship. If we don't, it'll be very fascinating because when I hear him speak, like I remember the first time I ever came across him, I just started crying because I felt like I had found somebody I've been looking for my entire life, but not knowing who I was looking for. It was like I never had a dad and I found my dad. It was just this really wild thing, and he's just so kind, and like he has a massive heart, which is why I love him. But he is brilliant. Like my God, he literally is cracking like codes, like encryptions from Leonardo da Vinci and all these people, like on a weekly basis. Like he will literally he's always just cracking codes and stuff. And like he'll be doing geometry and he'll be like just making the Vitruvian Man and squaring the circle. And like he's always just like on his Instagram, you can just look, he's just constantly
I
doodling.
will.
It's mind blowing. But his biggest fascination is Egypt. And he's cracking the pyramids all the time, and he's like right up to date. I think he might be one of the world's foremost experts in Egypt right now. And he has like a show on Gaia called Codex. He's just like it was wild. I never knew he existed up until like 2 months ago.
Yeah,
It's
I
the
don't know him.
weirdest thing.
I'm gonna have to get that information from you.
Yeah.
I'll find
Oh, yeah. And
it.
I just go on.
I've followed Graham Hancock for years. I read his book when I was a teen. Like
Wow.
that kind of stuff really lights me up. So yeah, absolutely, I'm interested. How cool.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm so excited to meet him one day. One quick question about Myro. Actually, before we get to Myro here in a second, because like I know me and you, we both have a fascination and a love for like the card game Magic the Gathering. So I know that you have these things that you probably carry around. So when you're going, I guess like how much stuff do you have in your home base? Because I know you said a lot of the time you don't take anything more than you can carry in a backpack. So in your home base, what is your perception and your way that I don't want to call it hoard, but what do you view as important enough to take up space in your life?
Yeah, well, when we have bases, I don't mind spending money making my space comfortable. And then we just get rid of it because we've spent it already, and then we just get rid of it. Like
Wow.
the attachment to stuff is like that relationship has transformed. I don't need to hold on to things. I don't have the fear that because I spent the money on this thing, I have to retain the value and I can't give it away. No, it's just as valuable as I give it away. Why do I need to possess it? So like we bought when we lived in Peru, I wanted a washing machine. I didn't like washing, my clothes on the sink outside in the washboard like everybody did. I did that for a while and I wanted a washing machine. I didn't want to do that anymore. So I bought a washing machine. It made my life a little bit easier. And I bought, decorations for the house. Then we got rid of it when we left. It's just that simple. But there are some books that we travel with, but we really
Mm.
try to keep things minimally. But when we started our company, Project World School, we finally had the justification of having a game bag. And both my son and I are huge board game people. And so now we had a reason. So we had, Cards Against Humanity and all the stuff that we could play with the teens on our teen trips. But we also had games with us. So we
Mm.
had quite a few games with us. But before, when we were just backpacks, like our most valuable game was cards. I can't even tell you how many games of cards Miro and I played. And he's a really good chess player. I can't play him anymore. He's like
Wow.
way too strategic and really aggressive. And I'm like, I just want to have fun. He's like, Mom, that's not the point of playing. The point of playing is to win. And he became a really strategic player. So, like things like chess and backgammon, and we have our rummy tiles and we have stuff. Yeah. But then when we started doing our teen trips, like we got more games like Werewolf and role playing games and Magic the Gathering and, stuff like that. So casual games as
Mm.
well as strategic games.
And when you said at the beginning all you had was cards, do you mean like a 52,
Yeah.
like a just no? Because yeah, there's like an infinite amount of cards, games you
Oh
can
my
play
God.
with that game.
Totally. And
Wow.
dice. Dice are good too. They're cards and dice. You can carry those around with you everywhere.
What are some games that you can play with cards and like? Do you combine the cards and the dice, or are they two different things?
Two different things. Two different
And
things.
how do you play a game? What's a fun game to play with just dice?
Um, oh, I can't remember the game was played, but we learned it in somewhere in Latin America. And it's there's, you could play Farkle with it, you could play Yahtzee, but this game that we played was kind of like not a betting game. I wish I remember what it's called, but it was all in Spanish. It's so
Wow.
much fun. We played it for years. We haven't played it in ages, but it just required 5 dice. Now my
Wow.
son, he loves like D&D and he's got
Yeah.
all different dices. But yeah, that's different.
And I know you had mentioned to me prior that Myro is a game developer. a board game developer. What is, because, obviously he's a very clever, intelligent human being with a lot of, fantastic social skills. I'm curious. And he's 23.
He's 23. He'll be 24 early next year.
So he's 23. And I don't expect him to have an answer to this, or even you, but do you guys ever talk about, does he have a vision for his life, or a kind of, what does he see himself contributing to the world in any way, if anything, yet?
He's busy following his passions. He really is. And I think that's what we give to the world. We give our
Mm,
passions. And that really is our purpose, right? To resonate in ourself fully. Um, what has he done for work? Um, well, we co-founded this company together, and he's been co-leading with me these trips for teens. They're educational, immersive learning trips through Project World School. We've done more than 30 of them with hundreds of teenagers and in
mm,
places like Thailand, Japan, South Africa, Wales, all over Latin America. So we've done trips, these temporary learning communities. Some of them are a month long, some are only 10 days. So he's learned how to facilitate, problem solve, lead, create and hold space for people, listen, yeah, lots of different things, organize, the actual nuts and bolts of a trip and paperwork and payments and insurance, all that. He's learned all that because, again, we're partners. So we do it all together. And he's actually starting next year. We've been hosting the trips together. Starting next year, he's going to lead his first trip by himself, and he
wow.
will start doing the longer trips just by himself with a team of co-facilitators. But I'm going to step back from that. It's time. We created the company together 10 years ago, and we created it primarily so my son would have social community and, be around like-minded teens. That was really important to him. A lot of them are self-directed or unschooled or homeschooled, and that really resonated. So he had a community of people that he met. But now that he's older, he's facilitating this community who are our target audience, this is who we do produce the trips for. And I lived, 5, 6 months out of every year with communities of teenagers, and I'm upper 50s now. I'm stepping into my life after that, and it's
Mm,
taking that over. I'm still co-facilitating with him the intro trips, the shorter ones, the 10-day trips.
mm,
But yeah, his first trip he's going to lead solo, but with a co-facilitator that has worked with us many times before. We'll be in Thailand, a 3-week trip, and we do cultural immersion. We do cooking classes, massage classes. A week working with the elephants. We do rock climbing, all sorts of immersive, stuff.
yeah,
Like,
experiences.
yeah, a lot of fun. So he's really good at that. But he owns a business. He co-owns a business with me. So he's doing that over the pandemic. He got a job working because obviously we weren't leading trips, but he was teaching self-directed young people at a micro academy online. And so he did that for 2.5 years. And in fact, I think tomorrow is his last day. He gave his notice. Now
Wow.
the travel's starting again, and we're going to start doing the trips again. And he did that, made great money. for 2.5 years. And he didn't go to school, but he's a great facilitator and a great orator and a great creative person and a great researcher and loves learning and can facilitate and hold space for young people that are doing that. So we did that. And he's also 2.5 years into designing a brand new engine for a tabletop D&D like game, but it's based on myth, and it's very
wow.
it's really it's based on accurate myth, unlike what's his name, Reardon, who wrote all those
Rick Riordan, yeah.
who just like totally slaughtered the myth. He couldn't read those because he's like, that's not the real myth,
Yeah.
So it's really accurate.
That's very cool. And for you, you said that you're embarking on a next leg of your journey. What do you see yourself doing next?
Well, I love Mexico. I love the city that we live in. I love this as a base. I actually, for the first time in many, many, many years, I now have dogs. And I have a garden and I have a boyfriend. And so, like, my life has changed. It's a new season of my life. I wrote this book. I'm working with teens. That is really my passion and purpose, and it lights me up. And I know that's why I'm on this planet. And I know that everything that I did in my life led me to this point. And the teens that I work with just fulfill me. And I think it's a beautiful engagement. I know how to partner with teens. I know how to teach tools for mental health, and I know how to hold space and connect and make sure that they feel seen, heard, and understood. And that's the one thing I wish I had when I was a teen.
That's beautiful. Well, this is a great place to end this. And now for shameless plug time. So if you can if you can share with us what you're working on, where we can find you, all of that stuff.
Sure. So the work that I do with teens can be found at Transformative Mentoring for Teens. Also check out projectworldschool.com. And then I am just about ready to produce my 10th World Schooling Conference for families here in Mexico, and that's taking place in March of 2023. And you can find out information on how to come and be a part of a 5-day conference with families at a water park here in Mexico in March at worldschoolfamilysummit.com. So that's what I do. I also produce mental health trips for teens. I've got one coming up in May based on the hero's journey. And I will be facilitating a group of teens to discover their own inner hero. And we'll be designing the journey and the monsters and the dragons and all that stuff. It's writing, art, improv, mask making, and storytelling.
Wow. All together. Wow. Well, thank you for a beautiful conversation. This was fascinating. It gives me a lot to ponder in my own life, and perhaps ignites a fire in me to start traveling again. And finding a way to maintain my current, not my lifestyle, but my current responsibilities in the world. I feel like, my podcast, and sometimes I know this is part of who I am. My podcast is definitely, I feel, my value to the world, and I feel it's only going to grow. And I have always had a question of how will I do this in a new way? Because I know I don't want to do it the way I've been doing now, like in Canada, kind of having a very, the life I live. I kind of, what you're saying inspires me a lot. And it's like, okay, maybe there's a way to do my podcast and also live a more exciting free life. So thank you for inspiring that in me, and thank you for coming on, Lainie.
My pleasure. I can't wait to watch you grow and explode and step into your power, your full power. I mean, you're stepping into it, but just being there. I see it in you. It's amazing. I'm excited to be a part of this. Thank you for the invitation.
Aw, thank you, and take care, everybody. Love you. Bye. Welcome back, everyone. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to let me know in the comment section down below. And if you want to check out more episodes just like this one, click right here, and I'll see you in the next one.